Championship season starts this weekend, and we have predicted Swansea City to finish 10th, which would be one place higher than their finish last season. A few reasons for this. And first, it's the recruitment that I think has looked really, really strong. I was a bit concerned after the departure of Matt Grimes in January, who I know his stock had fallen a little bit with Swansea fans, and certainly the performances after he left has some wondering if they might be better off without him. But he's a player that I really like, and I think he's a very unique player. But they brought in Ethan Galbraith, who I really, really rate, as I've spoken about on DragonSports before. He's a really technically gifted player. He's versatile, having played a lot of last season at right back, but his role at right back was in a weird way quite similar to Grimes' role in midfield for Swansea, a player who they basically looked to get the ball into as often as possible, who's very safe in possession, but also has the technical ability to create, and that is something that I think he'll really thrive in this environment. We've also seen Inusa come in, the wide player I'm really excited to see, has some really impressive kind of dribbling and ball carrying stats that I'm excited to see how that translates to the Championship, and signed for a decent fee as well. It felt like often last season Swansea really lacked a bit of X factor, a bit of pizzazz in the final third, and hopefully he'll be able to provide that. And Cameron Burgess, who I still think is probably one of the shrewdest signings of the whole window, who comes in to replace Harry Darling, who's gone to Norwich. Burgess, a very no-nonsense centre-back, someone who is a defender first, can play a little bit, but isn't necessarily a kind of passing defender, and I fancy him to score a few goals from centre-back as well, from set pieces. So it's a really impressive recruitment, and should they get Richard Konay over the line as well to kind of rival Vipotnik for that striker role, I'll be really impressed. You know, he's someone who has scored a lot of goals last season at Wycombe, and what's often forgotten, I think, with Konay is how young he is. I think he's 21 or 22, but he's a player who has developed so quickly, having played for Athletic Newham in non-league, has stepped up to League One after kind of taking a bit of time to come into the team. Has scored a lot of goals last season, drifted a bit towards the end of the campaign, as you'd probably expect for someone going through their kind of first full proper first team season. But at his age and his goal scoring record and the raw attributes that he's got, if Swansea are able to get that over the line, I think he's a player that would thrive and benefit from that, and certainly from a long term perspective could be a really important player. Now, the reason I think that some see, and we've had some comments, that we've got Swansea too high, people are not necessarily seeing them as potential playoff challenges. And part of the reason for that is the manager, and Alan Sheehan. I think the kind of perception amongst Swansea fans is that he's very good off the back of his caretaker spell. I'm always a little bit reluctant to kind of buy into caretaker spells. The reason for that being that often managers are sacked at the end of a run of poor results, when maybe the performances aren't quite as bad as the results suggest. And a variance means that often the caretakers capitalise on that. They don't have to do much, but results turn, things start going their way, and they look like geniuses. With Sheehan, I'm not sure that's the case. I think he had to deal with quite a few issues in January, certainly the departure of Grimes, an attempt to kind of continue playing a certain way that would please the Swansea fans in the Swansea way, whilst also trying to get the results needed to, at the beginning of his tenure, ensure that Swansea weren't sucked into a relegation battle. And quite the opposite happened. The results were so good that they ended up being on the fringes of the playoff for a time, and had Swansea fans dreaming and wondering if they could force their way in. Now, it might be unfair to expect him to do exactly the same as that, and there were definitely some red flags in the underlying numbers, with the data not necessarily being quite as good as the results suggested. But I like the way that he talks in the press. He's very measured. I like the way that he looked to continue playing an attractive style of football, but doesn't seem too wedded to it. Doesn't feel like he has to play that way. Looks to be much more tactically flexible than the likes of Russell Martin and Luke Williams, who've gone before him. And crucially, Rich Montague, who's come in from Notts County, who I think is a massive plus. He's a guy who did so well at County. He's now pulling the strings at Swansea. It's no surprise to me that I really like the business that they've done, because he's the person doing that. And I just do not believe, even though obviously the process to appoint a new manager probably didn't go to plan, I don't think he is naive enough to buy into a caretaker spell if there wasn't something to it. The fact that he's appointed Sheehan suggests internally that he's really highly rated, and he's someone that I can see having a decent season. I think the Championship this season is quite congested. We've seen teams who've come up from League One, like Birmingham and Wrexham, and even Charlton to an extent, are pretty highly fancied not to struggle down towards the bottom end. But similarly, probably some question marks about the quality of the teams that have come down. It feels like there isn't the likes of Leeds and Burnley who've gone before. Certainly Ipswich need a couple of key additions. Southampton, very, very poor in the Premier League last season, and Leicester still waiting to find out if they're going to get a points deduction. So this feels like a season where a team like Swansea could possibly surprise a few and force their way into the top six. But right now, maybe just with it being a slight kind of transition period in terms of players moving on. Even though I like the additions, they might just fall short. But pretty positive about Swansea's chances this season. Excited to see how they get on. Talented squad who should continue playing the Swansea way.